There are stories that draw us in with their depth and complexity, leaving us questioning human nature, the price of ambition, and the dark corners that can twist even the most beautiful of relationships. Today, we explore a tale woven with money, intrigue, love, and revenge, a story that will take you deep into the heart of a city that thrived on secrets, desires, and hidden agendas. This is the story of Stephen, Evelyn, and a murder that would shake a family to its core. Our story begins in 2002, in the city of Angeles, Philippines, known by some as the City of Angels. But behind its serene name lies a history of turbulence and chaos. Once a military-based town, it had long since transformed into a bustling, chaotic place, filled with bars, casinos, and entertainment venues. Angeles City became notorious for its vibrant and sometimes dark nightlife, where tourists, soldiers, and wanderers came seeking escape and pleasure. The city, often lit by neon lights at night, harbored many secrets that would soon surface in the most tragic of ways. It was in this city of contrasts, between the thrill of the night and the quiet of the day, that the lives of two people would intertwine, setting off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. At the heart of this story is Stephen, a young and brilliant software engineer who had already made a name for himself in his field. With a steady job and a salary that many would envy, over £60,000 per year, Stephen appeared to have it all. His life seemed perfect from the outside, built on years of hard work and dedication. However, Stephen's story is one of resilience and pain. He was no stranger to hardship, having lost his father at a young age in a tragic car accident. At just 14 years old, Stephen found himself thrust into the role of head of the family. His mother and two younger sisters depended on him, and he did everything he could to support them. This responsibility shaped Stephen into a mature and driven individual, someone who always put family first and worked tirelessly for their future. Despite the tragedy of his youth, Stephen's passion for computers became the light that guided him. He was self-taught, mastering both hardware and programming by the time he was an adult. His skills in technology quickly caught the attention of companies, leading him to a job opportunity in Hong Kong, a chance for him to move forward in his career and secure a brighter future for his family. And so, Stephen moved to Hong Kong, seeking both professional success and a fresh start. But even as his career soared in Hong Kong, there was still a piece of his heart that longed for something more. This feeling led him to a weekend escape to Angeles City, where his life would soon take a turn he never anticipated. It was there, amidst the neon lights and chaos, that he met her, the woman who would change his life forever. It was another weekend, and Stephen, having worked hard and earned his success, needed a break. Angeles City, with its promise of carefree nights and the chance to leave behind the pressures of his high-paying job, called to him. He arrived in the city, drawn to the bars and entertainment venues that offered the distraction he sought. It was in one of these bars that Stephen first laid eyes on Evelyn, a young woman who seemed to stand apart from the crowd. She was different from the others, innocent, quiet, and with a look that seemed both hopeful and desperate. Evelyn was a girl from Dam Island, a small, impoverished island in the Philippines, where she had grown up with little to her name. She had spent her childhood dreaming of a better life, of escaping the poverty that defined her world. When she was 13, Evelyn left home and came to Angeles City, working as a dancer in one of the many bars. Though the work was grueling and the pay meager, it was still far better than the life she had left behind. Evelyn dreamed of something more, of a life where she wouldn't have to rely on her body for survival. She dreamed of being noticed by a wealthy man, someone who could change her life and take her away from the bars and the grind of everyday survival. When Stephen entered the bar, it was as if the stars aligned. To Evelyn, he was everything she had dreamed of: a handsome, successful man who seemed to offer the promise of a different future. To Stephen, Evelyn appeared as someone pure, untouched by the hardships that defined the world around him. Their attraction was instant, and the connection they shared seemed almost too perfect. After spending a few days together, Stephen began to feel an unusual bond with Evelyn. She wasn't just another girl in the bar, there was something about her that felt real, something that stirred his desire to protect her. He saw her not just as a beautiful woman, but as someone who had been dealt a difficult hand in life and who deserved more. Without hesitation, Stephen decided to take the next step. He paid the bar owner a significant amount of money to redeem Evelyn from her life as a dancer, offering her a chance to leave it all behind. Evelyn, who had always dreamed of escaping her circumstances, saw this as the opportunity she had been waiting for. Stephen was not just a man, he was her escape, her savior. He gave her the chance to build a new life, to leave the struggles of her past behind. For Evelyn, this wasn't just about money, it was about finding freedom, a way to change her destiny. Stephen, meanwhile, found in Evelyn someone who offered him more than just companionship. She was the calm in the storm of his busy, high-stakes life. He saw in her an innocence and gratitude that he had never experienced before, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. He took her into his life with the belief that together, they could build a future, a life that was better than anything either of them had known before. But little did Stephen know, this decision would soon lead him down a path that would shatter the very life he had worked so hard to build. Evelyn, with her own ambitions and desires, had dreams that went far beyond what Stephen could have ever imagined. After their whirlwind romance, Stephen and Evelyn's lives took a dramatic turn. What had begun as an escape for Evelyn from the harsh realities of her past now evolved into something much more complicated. They married in Hong Kong, and with it, Evelyn's life transformed overnight. From a poor dancer working in a bar to the wife of a successful and wealthy man, the changes were stark. Gone were the days of struggling to make ends meet, replaced by a life of luxury that many only dream of. Stephen, now a high-level executive in his field, continued to work tirelessly, earning a considerable income, while Evelyn found herself basking in the comforts of their newly acquired wealth. The couple welcomed 2 children into their family, a daughter named Jessica and a son, Joshua. The family seemed perfect, a model of success and happiness. They lived in a large, beautiful house in a prestigious neighborhood, and Stephen ensured that Evelyn lacked for nothing. He gave her a generous monthly allowance of £1,000, a sum that was more than enough to provide her with a comfortable lifestyle in the Philippines. This was a far cry from the meager earnings she had once made as a dancer, and now Evelyn could enjoy the finest things life had to offer: designer clothes, trips abroad, and the freedom to spend without worry. It was the dream she had always harbored. However, as time passed, the fairytale life Stephen had worked so hard to create began to unravel, though not in the way one would expect. On the surface, everything seemed perfect: beautiful children, a lavish home, and a loving husband. Yet, beneath the glossy surface, something darker was taking root. Evelyn, once so grateful for the opportunities she had been given, began to show signs of discontent. Her desire for a better life, for more than what Stephen had already provided, began to grow. She had tasted luxury, and now, nothing seemed to satisfy her. Stephen, ever the hard-working provider, continued to pour his energy into his career. But he was beginning to notice changes in Evelyn. The once grateful and humble woman he had married seemed increasingly distant and dissatisfied. There were small signs at first: offhand comments about what she felt was missing in their life, her longing for even more expensive possessions, and a constant craving for more freedom to indulge herself. But it didn't stop there. It grew. Evelyn's extravagant spending habits, once manageable, became more excessive. She started asking for more money, justifying it by claiming that the children needed new things, that they should be living an even more lavish lifestyle, and that Stephen, with his high income, could afford it. The expenses piled up, and Stephen began to question how much money was enough. The tension between them started to build. Arguments that were once rare began to surface more frequently, and the root of these disputes was always the same: money. Evelyn's dissatisfaction with her life had now fully evolved into a deep-seated greed. She wanted more luxury, more attention, more of Stephen's wealth, and more of everything she felt she was entitled to. To Stephen, it was a clear shift. What had once been a beautiful and uncomplicated life now felt like a never-ending cycle of demands and expectations that he could not keep up with. Their disagreements grew more intense, and their relationship, once founded on love and shared dreams, began to crack. Evelyn, who had once been so content with their simple life, now saw herself as deserving of even greater status. Stephen, who had given her everything he could, began to feel trapped in a marriage where his every effort to provide was met with endless wants and expectations. What had started as a marriage built on love was now being overshadowed by materialism and Evelyn's unquenchable thirst for more. It wasn't long before Stephen realized that no matter how much he gave, it was never going to be enough for Evelyn. The lavish gifts, the luxury vacations, and the grand gestures were not satisfying her inner void. And, perhaps more troublingly, Stephen began to wonder if the woman he had married, the woman he had fallen in love with, had always been driven by something much darker than love: greed. The cracks in their marriage grew wider as Stephen and Evelyn clashed over their future. He had worked hard to provide for his family, but he was slowly realizing that Evelyn's vision of their future no longer aligned with his own. What started as an innocent desire to escape poverty had morphed into something dangerous: an insatiable desire to climb higher, to achieve more, and to gain power and control over everything. As Evelyn's desires grew, so too did the tension in their household. And as the stakes increased, the pressure on their relationship became unbearable. This would not just be a battle over money, it would be a struggle for control, and in the end, it would lead to something far darker than either of them could have imagined. As time passed, Evelyn's discontent with her life grew more intense. What had once been a dream come true now felt like a gilded cage. Despite the wealth Stephen provided her, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved more. She had gone from a life of hardship to one of luxury, but it was never enough. The fine clothes, expensive vacations, and lavish lifestyle that so many would envy seemed to lose their luster in Evelyn's eyes. She had grown accustomed to this life of excess, and it had become her new baseline. Now, she wanted more money, more status, more control. Stephen, on the other hand, had been doing his best to keep the peace. As the tension grew, he started to notice the growing dissatisfaction in his wife. Her demands were never-ending, and her requests for more money became more frequent. Evelyn wanted more than what she had been given, and it didn't matter how much Stephen provided. There was always something new to crave, some new luxury to possess. At first, Stephen had indulged her, thinking it would make her happy, but the more he gave, the more she wanted. In response, Stephen began to scale back. He stopped giving her the large sums of money she had been accustomed to, hoping it would rein in her growing sense of entitlement. He cut down on her monthly allowance, hoping to curb her extravagant spending. But instead of solving the problem, this decision only deepened the rift between them. Evelyn, already feeling entitled to more, now felt betrayed and trapped in a life she couldn't control. She resented Stephen for limiting her, for not providing the way he once had. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about power. She wanted to feel in control of her own fate, free from the constraints that Stephen had placed on her. As the marriage deteriorated, Evelyn's frustration festered. She no longer saw her husband as the man who had saved her from a life of poverty. Instead, she began to see him as an obstacle to the life she truly wanted, a life where she could live without limits, without restraint. Her mind began to twist, consumed by thoughts of how she could gain more control, more wealth, and freedom from Stephen's grip. It was in this environment of frustration and dissatisfaction that the darkest thought entered Evelyn's mind. What if she didn't have to rely on Stephen at all? What if, instead of enduring a life of constant tension, she could simply end Stephen's life and claim everything for herself? It was a thought that came slowly at first, a dark fantasy born out of greed. But soon, it transformed into a plan, an unthinkable plan that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Evelyn, determined to take control of her future, began to plot Stephen's murder. She realized that the only way to secure everything she wanted was to eliminate the source of her frustrations, her husband. Life insurance money would ensure her financial security, and without Stephen in the picture, she could live the life she had always dreamed of. But Evelyn knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, someone who could carry out her plan. That's when she turned to Anno and Alexander, two men who had been part of her life for some time. Anno was a man she had become close to, someone she could confide in. Alexander, too, had been a regular presence in her life, and Evelyn had always trusted him. Both men were familiar with her struggles and her desires, and she knew they would be willing to help her get what she wanted. She began to bring them into her plans, speaking to them about her desire to rid herself of Stephen and take control of her future. With their involvement, Evelyn's plan began to take shape. She convinced Anno and Alexander that this was the only way to secure her future, to give her the life she had always dreamed of. They, too, were drawn into her web of manipulation, and they agreed to assist her in executing the murder. Evelyn promised them a share of the wealth once Stephen was gone: money, power, and freedom. What started as a personal vendetta now became a conspiracy, with Evelyn at the helm, manipulating everyone around her to achieve her goal. The involvement of Anno and Alexander brought the plot to fruition. They became her key accomplices, helping to orchestrate the murder that would end Stephen's life and change everything forever. As the plan grew closer to execution, Evelyn became more focused, more ruthless in her determination to make Stephen's death a reality. She knew that once it was done, there would be no turning back. The stage was set, and the deadly conspiracy was now in motion. With the help of her accomplices, Evelyn would stop at nothing to get what she wanted, driven by her insatiable greed and desire for control. As the pieces of the plan fell into place, Evelyn's life would never be the same again, nor would anyone else's. The night of July 17, 2002, began like any other for Stephen. After a long, exhausting day of work, he returned to his rented apartment in Makati, Philippines, where he lived alone, seeking the comfort of a good night's rest. Little did he know that the safety and security he had worked so hard to build was about to come crashing down. The life he had constructed, a life filled with family, success, and promise, was about to be stolen from him, all because of the deep desires of the woman he loved. As Stephen entered his apartment, exhausted from his day, he had no inkling that a dark conspiracy was unfolding around him. With the apartment quiet, he undressed and went to bed, the weight of his workday heavy on his shoulders. He didn't suspect that the very woman he had given everything to, the woman he had shared his dreams and life with, was plotting his murder. Evelyn, having manipulated and organized the entire event, knew that tonight would be the night her plans would come to fruition. Outside the apartment, however, things were beginning to shift. Michael, Stephen's colleague and a close friend, had returned to the apartment after picking up his girlfriend from the airport. It was past midnight, and Michael was struggling to sleep. The city's noise was muffled, and the apartment was quiet, but then something caught his attention: a sound. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. Michael, puzzled and concerned, strained to listen. It didn't seem right. A chill ran down his spine as the sounds grew louder, growing closer to Stephen's door. Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken by a loud crash. The door to the apartment burst open, and in stormed three men. Michael, startled and still half awake, struggled to comprehend what was happening. The men were aggressive, their eyes filled with intent as they approached him. They didn't speak to him, they simply asked for Stephen. Michael, still dazed, replied that Stephen was sleeping, but it was clear they weren't interested in him. Their mission was clear: they had come for Stephen. Before Michael could process the situation fully, the men shoved him aside. One of them immediately approached Stephen's bedroom, the others standing guard. Michael, in a state of shock, stood frozen in the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. The sound of muffled voices and the shuffling of feet filled the air. Then, without warning, the sharp sound of gunshots pierced the stillness of the night. 4 loud shots rang out, and Michael's blood ran cold. He rushed to Stephen's bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest, praying that he had imagined it. But when he saw Stephen, it was too late. Stephen lay there, motionless, in a pool of blood. The room was bathed in the stark, chilling sight of his lifeless body, blood pooling around him, staining the sheets. His eyes were still open, the life drained from him in mere moments. Michael, horrified, immediately rushed to Stephen's side, trying desperately to revive him, but there was nothing he could do. The man who had once been full of life, a brilliant software engineer with so much potential, was now gone. In a panic, Michael called the police, his voice trembling as he explained the scene before him. The ambulance arrived soon after, but it was too late. Stephen was declared dead on arrival. Michael's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. He could hardly believe what he had just witnessed. The police began their investigation, but there was an eerie calm to the entire scene, one that Michael couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Evelyn's reaction to the entire event was far from what anyone might expect. When Michael called her with the devastating news, there was no outpouring of grief, no immediate call to her in-laws, no frantic attempts to contact Stephen's family. Instead, her response was cold, almost detached. She showed no signs of the profound loss a wife should feel upon hearing such tragic news. Evelyn, who had spent years living a life of luxury provided by Stephen's hard work, seemed almost unaffected by the news of his violent death. Michael, deeply shaken by Evelyn's lack of emotion, couldn't help but feel that something was terribly wrong. How could someone so close to Stephen react so indifferently? The suspicion gnawed at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn knew more than she was letting on. But the police, still investigating the crime scene, didn't seem to notice anything unusual in her behavior. It was as though they were brushing off Michael's concerns, and they quickly dismissed any suspicion surrounding Evelyn. Yet Michael, who had spent enough time around Stephen and Evelyn to know their dynamic, couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. Something about Evelyn's behavior felt off, too controlled, too cold for a woman who had just lost her husband. As the hours passed and the police continued their investigation, the truth began to emerge. This wasn't a random robbery gone wrong, this was the result of careful planning, a conspiracy designed to eliminate Stephen for his wealth and life insurance money. Evelyn's role in the murder was becoming clearer, though the police would take time to piece everything together. The cold, calculated nature of Stephen's murder, combined with Evelyn's detached reaction, set the stage for the shocking revelations to come. The tragedy that had struck Stephen's family would soon turn into a tale of betrayal, greed, and a love that had twisted into something dark and deadly. The tragedy of Stephen's murder sent shockwaves through his family, but none were hit harder than his mother, Margaret. She had always been protective of Stephen, having raised him after his father's death, and now, faced with the heartbreaking reality of her son's violent death, she was determined to uncover the truth. But something about the whole situation felt wrong, and it wasn't just the obvious loss of her son that troubled her, it was Evelyn's behavior. The woman Stephen had loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, seemed completely unfazed by his death. When Margaret first spoke to Evelyn after the murder, she expected tears, grief, and a rush of emotions, anything that would indicate that the woman who had been by Stephen's side for years actually cared about him. But instead, Evelyn's reaction was unsettlingly cold. She seemed detached, almost as if Stephen's death didn't affect her at all. When Margaret tried to console her, there was a stark lack of emotion in Evelyn's responses. There was no crying, no heartfelt plea for justice, nothing. Just a strange calmness that sent a chill down Margaret's spine. As the days passed, Margaret began to observe more subtle signs that deepened her suspicions. Evelyn's behavior was erratic. She didn't seem to care about finding Stephen's killers or helping with the investigation. When Margaret asked Evelyn if she had contacted the police or Stephen's family, Evelyn's response was vague and dismissive. She didn't seem to have any sense of urgency, nor did she show any signs of the profound grief one would expect from a widow who had just lost her husband in such a brutal manner. Margaret, ever the determined mother, knew that she couldn't just accept what had happened at face value. She began to piece together the odd details she had noticed in the days following Stephen's death. The more she thought about it, the more she felt something wasn't adding up. Her gut told her that Evelyn was hiding something, that there was more to the story than the police had uncovered. Margaret couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that perhaps Evelyn was involved in her son's murder. The question kept haunting her: how could someone who had been so close to Stephen be so indifferent to his death? Determined to get to the truth, Margaret decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private detective, someone who could investigate Evelyn without raising suspicion. The detective's job was clear: follow Evelyn, watch her every move, and gather any evidence that might confirm Margaret's suspicions. The detective began to tail Evelyn, carefully documenting her activities, conversations, and any individuals she came into contact with. What the detective uncovered would send shockwaves through Margaret, confirming that her worst fears were true. The surveillance revealed Evelyn's connections to two men, Anno and Alexander, both of whom had been in and out of Evelyn's life for some time. Anno, in particular, had a close relationship with Evelyn, one that went beyond casual acquaintance. The detective learned that Anno and Alexander were the same men who had been seen around Evelyn shortly before Stephen's death. Evelyn had been in constant contact with them, and their relationship seemed far too close to be mere coincidences. It became evident that these men had more to do with Stephen's murder than anyone had originally thought. Margaret, now certain that Evelyn had not only been complicit but perhaps even the mastermind behind the murder, dug deeper into the connections between Evelyn and these men. She discovered that Evelyn had been in communication with them about the murder plot in the days leading up to Stephen's death. What began as a hunch was now turning into a clear picture of a calculated conspiracy. Margaret also found several pieces of crucial evidence that linked Evelyn directly to the crime. A series of suspicious phone calls between Evelyn and Anno and Alexander had been recorded. There were emails between Evelyn and the two men discussing money and plans, and there was even a receipt for a large cash withdrawal that Evelyn had made just days before Stephen's death. These were the final pieces of the puzzle Margaret had been looking for, confirming her worst suspicion that Evelyn had been involved in orchestrating Stephen's murder, motivated by greed and her desire for control over his wealth. As the evidence mounted, Margaret became more and more convinced that Evelyn was not the innocent victim she had appeared to be. She had manipulated Stephen's love and trust, leading him to believe that they were building a future together, all the while plotting his demise. The more Margaret uncovered, the more chilling it became. She had always trusted Evelyn as part of her family, but now, she could see that the woman had used her son for his wealth and life insurance money. The weight of this discovery was crushing, and Margaret's heart grew heavier with every new piece of information she uncovered. The woman who had been part of their family, who had smiled and laughed with them at family gatherings, was now revealed to be someone capable of cold-blooded murder. Margaret knew that this couldn't go unpunished. She had to find a way to bring Evelyn to justice and make sure that the truth about her son's death was exposed for the world to see. As the investigation progressed, more and more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and with each passing day, the truth about Evelyn's involvement in Stephen's murder became clearer. What had initially seemed like a random, senseless crime was now beginning to look like a carefully orchestrated plot, one driven by greed, manipulation, and a desire for control over the life that Evelyn had come to view as hers. It was no longer just about money, it was about power. Evelyn had not acted out of desperation, she had planned this murder with a cold and calculating mind. Months of relentless investigation had led Margaret and the authorities closer to the truth, but it was the testimonies from those involved in the crime that would finally expose Evelyn for the mastermind she truly was. Robin, a key accomplice in the murder plot, was one of the first to break. His testimony would be crucial in unraveling the full extent of Evelyn's manipulation. Initially, Robin had been silent, too afraid to speak out, but the mounting pressure and the realization of the consequences of his actions pushed him to cooperate with the authorities. Under intense questioning, Robin confirmed what Margaret had feared all along: Evelyn had been the one to orchestrate Stephen's death. She had manipulated Anno and Alexander, promising them a share of the life insurance money in exchange for their help in carrying out the murder. Robin revealed how Evelyn had carefully laid out the details, ensuring that her plan would succeed without a hitch. He told investigators how she had even instructed Anno and Alexander on the logistics of the murder, making sure that Stephen's death would appear as a robbery gone wrong. But it was all a lie. The plot had been years in the making, and Evelyn had used everyone around her as pawns in her quest for wealth and freedom. As Robin's testimony unfolded, it painted a chilling picture of how deeply Evelyn had manipulated those closest to her. She had built a web of lies, using her charm and emotional manipulation to convince Anno and Alexander to do her bidding. She had made them believe that they were helping her escape a difficult life, when in reality, they were helping her murder the man who had given her everything. Robin's revelation was the key piece of evidence that finally confirmed Evelyn's role as the mastermind behind the crime. But Robin was not the only one who had played a role in the murder. Anno and Alexander, too, had been involved, and their roles in the crime were just as significant. The police, having gathered enough evidence, moved quickly to arrest both men. Anno and Alexander were taken into custody, their involvement in the murder confirmed by both the investigation and the testimonies from Robin. Anno, the man who had been so close to Evelyn, was now revealed to be a willing accomplice, a man who had helped her execute the murder for the promise of money. Alexander, too, had played his part, and both men were charged with Stephen's murder. The arrests of Anno and Alexander were a significant breakthrough in the case. It was now clear that they had been key players in the conspiracy, but the final, most damning blow would come with the arrest of Evelyn herself. Although she had maintained her innocence throughout the investigation, the overwhelming evidence combined with the testimony from Robin and the actions of Anno and Alexander had made it impossible for her to deny her involvement any longer. As the investigation continued, Robin was granted immunity for his testimony, a decision made in exchange for his cooperation. His role in the murder was significant, but he had not been the mastermind. He had been manipulated, just as Anno and Alexander had been, and his willingness to come forward provided the final pieces of the puzzle. It was Robin's testimony that brought the entire conspiracy to light, confirming that Evelyn had not acted in a moment of passion or desperation, but rather, in cold, calculated pursuit of her own desires. With the arrests of Anno, Alexander, and the damning testimony from Robin, the truth about Stephen's murder was finally revealed. Evelyn, the woman who had once appeared so sweet, so innocent, had orchestrated the death of her husband in a plot driven by nothing more than greed and the desire for more. The case was no longer just a mystery, it was a story of manipulation, betrayal, and murder. Evelyn's carefully constructed life had crumbled, and the consequences of her actions were now catching up with her. After months of investigation, interviews, and damning testimony from Evelyn's accomplices, the case finally reached its conclusion. Evelyn, once a seemingly innocent woman, was arrested and brought to trial for the murder of her husband, Stephen. Throughout the trial, Evelyn maintained her innocence, claiming she had nothing to do with Stephen's death. But despite her pleas, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The testimonies from Anno, Alexander, and Robin were too clear to ignore, and the investigation had uncovered her role in meticulously orchestrating the murder. The once carefully constructed facade she had built over the years began to crumble as the courtroom filled with the facts that exposed the truth. The prosecutors laid out the details of Evelyn's manipulation, how she had used Stephen's love and trust to fulfill her own desires, and how she had plotted his death for the life insurance money and the control over his wealth. The jury, after hearing all the evidence, had no choice but to find Evelyn guilty. Her conviction was a stark reminder of how someone, driven by greed and an insatiable hunger for more, could betray not just their spouse, but the very life they had been given. Evelyn, once a beloved member of Stephen's family, was now seen as the cold-hearted murderer she had become. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison, a sentence that would serve as both a punishment for her actions and a grim reflection of the choices she had made. As Evelyn was led away to begin her long sentence, the weight of her crime became painfully clear. The wealth and luxury she had once craved, the life she had taken so much for granted, had cost her everything. Her manipulative behavior, her greed, and her complete disregard for the life of the man who had given her everything had led her down a path from which there was no return. The consequences of her actions were now a permanent part of her story. This case served as a harsh reminder of the destructive power of greed. Evelyn's insatiable desire for more money, more power, more control had consumed her to the point where she was willing to take the life of the very man who had provided for her. It is a lesson about the dangers of never being satisfied, about how the pursuit of material wealth can warp one's morals and lead them to commit unspeakable acts. The damage Evelyn caused wasn't just to Stephen, but to everyone who had ever cared for her, including her own children. But perhaps the most poignant lesson came from the woman who had never given up on seeking the truth, Margaret, Stephen's mother. Margaret's journey through the grief and heartbreak of losing her son was compounded by her relentless pursuit of justice. As a mother, she could have accepted the tragedy and walked away, but instead, she chose to fight for the truth, no matter how difficult or dangerous it became. Margaret hired private detectives, gathered evidence, and risked her own safety to bring Evelyn's betrayal to light. Her determination to find justice for her son was a testament to the lengths a mother will go to when seeking the truth, no matter how much it costs her personally. Margaret's journey was not easy, and there were times when it seemed like the truth might remain hidden forever. But she persevered, driven by a love for her son that refused to be extinguished by even the darkest of circumstances. In the end, her persistence paid off. Not only did she bring Evelyn to justice, but she also ensured that Stephen's story would not fade into the shadows. Thank you for watching this tragic true crime story. The tale of Stephen, Evelyn, and the devastating consequences of greed reminds us all of the importance of trust, honesty, and the dangers of materialism. It also serves as a powerful example of the strength of a mother's love and the lengths she will go to for justice. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real crime stories. Remember to stay calm, stay safe, and always seek help when you need it. See you in the next video.